We continue now at the top of Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph and Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 21a. On the previous summit, the Gemara asked if a Kohen becomes Tameh after he's Mekadesh Yadayim V'Raglayim, after he sanctifies his hands and the feet in the Kior, so does he have to be Mekadesh again? And the Gemara is now in the middle of bringing a proof from Para Aduma. By Para Aduma, according to the opinion of Reb Chia Bar Yosef, the Kohen is Mekadesh Yadayim V'Raglayim before performing the Avod of the Para Aduma. And the Gemara now continues and asks, V'Hapara, but when it comes to Para Aduma, the Tamuye Mitaminan Le, we actually make the Kohen Tameh on purpose. The Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, Mitamin Hayu HaKohen HaSoref HaSapara, they would be Mitame, the Kohen who burned the Para Aduma, Umatvilin also, and then they would have him immerse, Lahotzi Miliban Shel Tzidukin. The reason why they did this was to show that the Tzidukin were wrong. Shahayu Omer, because the Tzidukin would say, B'mu'urve Shemesh Haisa Nasis, that the Kohen would actually have to be totally pure. He'd have to wait until the sun goes down, at which point he would be completely pure. Otherwise, he would not be allowed to be involved in the process of Para Aduma, but we don't hold that way. We hold that as long as he has Tvila, even if it's a situation where he is a Tvul Yom, he hasn't yet had Harav Shemesh, still he's considered to be pure enough to do Para Aduma. And in any case, what do we see? We see that this Kohen was Tameh, and if the Kohen was Tameh, yet he does not need a new Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. And so Shmami no lo pasla ba Tumah. So you see that Tumah is not a disqualification in terms of the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. And the Gemara continues and answers, Shani Par, it's different by Para Aduma, Hoel utvul Yom, lo pasal ba. Since Tvul Yom is not a disqualification, once we already see certain leniencies by Para Aduma in terms of Tumah, so therefore the same is going to be true with Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, even though the person becomes Tameh, he doesn't do that again. But the Gemara continues, Yachi, if so, Lamali the Mekadesh, what's even the purpose of the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim? And the Gemara answers to that, Ke'ein avoda bu'inan, we need it to be similar to an avoda, we treat it like an avoda, and so Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim is done. And Rashi explains, V'hapara de tamuye mitaminan le, by the Para Aduma they would make him tamei achar kiddush zeh. After the sanctification, he would then become tamei kidditnan, as we learned in the Mishnah. Utvila zu b'har hamishcha haisa, and this immersion was done in the har hamishcha that was done again on the har hazesim. V'hachi tanan la b'Meseches Para, and this is what it says in the Mishnah in Meseches Para. V'achar tvilaso miyadhu mesader marachosa v'sarfa, and then after his immersion, he would then arrange the burning of the Para Aduma. Alma achar hakiddush hazeh haisa. So you see that this was after the sanctification. Ushmamina lo pas lo tumah. And you see that the fact that he became tameh did not disqualify him. And then the Gemara said, if so, lamali de mekadesh. What's the point of even doing the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim if we're being so lenient because of the fact that we're also lenient that a Tvul Yom can do this process? Hoel vein Kiddush kishar Kiddush, since this is not similar to other cases of sanctification, the Bach then has the Girsa Umeshani, and the Gemara then answers, Ke'ein avoda, we treat it like an avoda. And the Gemara continues, they had the following question, Ma'ul kadesh yodav v'raglav b'kior, is he able to sanctify his hands and his feet by sticking them into the kior instead of having the water pour on his hands and his feet? Mimenu amar achman, it says from it in the pasuk, v'lo b'socha, but not within it. Odilma, or maybe afilo b'socha, even inside of it is also going to be considered effective. Rashi explains, B'kior sheyachnes yodav v'raglav b'socho, that he actually puts his hands and feet again inside the kior. Is that good or not? And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, Tashma, come here, the following proof. This was quoted earlier from a Brisa. Oshataval b'mei ma'arav yavad. It says, if he immersed in the waters of a cave and then did the avoda psula, then his avoda is disqualified. That is not considered to be a sanctification of the hands and the feet. And so the Gemara now infers from this Brisa, Hamei kior dumya de mei ma'ara. But let's say he would do the same thing with the mei kior, but similar to the mei ma'ara, meaning again, he would immerse in the mei kior, v'yavad, and do the avoda suksher, then his avoda would be kosher, meaning it sounds like it's just because he immersed in these waters of the cave, it wasn't the mei kior, that's why it was ineffective. But otherwise, you just stick your hands and feet in the mei kior, that actually would be effective. And the Gemara continues and answers, lo, no, mei ma'ara itzrichle, don't make that inference, because we specifically in this brisa want to teach the case of mei ma'ara, the waters of the cave, shalo tomer, that one shouldn't say kol gufo tovel behen, that these are the kinds of waters that a person immerses his entire body in them. Yadav v'raglav lo kol shekain, so his hands and his feet all the more so. In other words, we're specifically teaching mei ma'ara, because mei ma'ara, technically speaking, is kosher as a mikvah, and that's why we're saying if he immerses in the mei ma'ara, that's not going to be effective for Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. Rashi explains Hakiyur Dumya Demara, if it would be the Kiyur, the basin similar to the Mara. Vehechidami, what would that mean to be similar? Kagon Shenichnas Lasocho, again, that he would enter inside of it. And then the Gemara said, no, Mei Ma'ara Itzrichle. We want to teach specifically. We need to teach specifically Mei Ma'ara. Kilomar, what it means to say is as follows. Liolam Dechavase Bekiyur Nami Pasal. If you would do the same thing by the Kiyur, it would also be disqualified. If that's the case, why not teach the case by the Kiyur? V'hai Denakat Mei Ma'ara. The reason we're teaching it by Mei Ma'ara, it's necessary specifically to teach in that case. Because Salkadai Dechamina, one might have thought, Hoel Utvila Ma'al Yasahi, since this is actually a good immersion, this is actually like going into a mikvah, so Adifahi Mikiyur, that's actually better than the waters of a Kiyur, Shehin She'uven, because the Kiyur is drawn water, and this water is not drawn water, and therefore you might have thought it's more effective. The Kiddush Ein Kan Utvila Ein Kan, you have nothing when it comes to the Kiyur. You've got no sanctification, no immersion. Avalacha, but over here, Tvila Ika, there is an immersion, and therefore you might have thought it's okay. Kamash Malan, that's what the Bryce is teaching us, that it is not effective. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef. Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef says, Mei Kiyur, the waters of the basin, Nifsalin lematirin kematirin, they become disqualified for matirin like matirin. We'll see Rashi in a moment. And le'evarim ke'evarim, they become disqualified for evarim, for limbs like evarim. Rav Chisda Amar Rav Chisda says, Af lematirin, even when it comes to matirin, ein nifsalin ella ba'amud hashachar ke'evarim. They don't become disqualified until amud hashachar, until dawn, just like evarim. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, and Rabbi Yochanan says, Kiyur, when it comes to the Kiyur, Kevon Shashaku, once it is sunk, Shuv Ein Ma'aleyu, you don't bring it up again. And Rashi explains, Hachi Garsinan, this is the proper text. Amar Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef, Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef says, Meikir nifsalin lematirin kematirin, le'evarim ke'evarim, the Meikir are disqualified for matirin like matirin, for evarim like evarim. Rav Chisda Amar af lematirin and nifsalin ela ba'amud hashachar ke'evarim. And Rav Chisda says, even for matirim, they're only disqualified by amud hashachar like evarim. Meikir, again, the waters of the Kiyur, lefizman avoda shehakiddush tzarich la, have zman meimav li pasal. What Rav Chia Bar Yosef is saying is, whatever the zman is for whatever avoda you're doing the kiddush for, so that's going to be the time that its waters are disqualified. In other words, when you're sanctifying, when the Kohen is sanctifying his hands and his feet to do the avoda, we have to look at the particular avoda that he is doing in order to determine when the disqualification will be in terms of the meikir. That's Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef's opinion. And Rashi continues and explains, Im avodas matiru, if for example the avoda the Kohen is doing is a matir, it's something that permits. Kegon avodas dam, for example, the avodah of the dam, that would be the throwing, the zrikas hadam, the throwing of the blood, so that permits the rest of the avodah of the carbon, for the carbon to be consumed on the mizbeach and to be consumed by people. O kemotzim, the same thing could be true by the komets, by the fistful, for the carbon mincha, that's also a matir. Shenifsolim bevo halayla alehem. The halacha is, when it comes to avodas dam, when it comes to the kamitza, they become disqualified when the night comes. Kedamrinan be'ezeu mekoman. That's what we're going to say later on in ezeu mekoman. Minayin ledam shenifsal b'shkias hachama. How do we know the blood becomes disqualified at sunset? And so, if you're doing the sanctification, if the Kohen is doing the sanctification, the kiddush yadayim v'raglayim for the matir, so make kir also when it comes to the waters of the kir as well. Nifsal and b'shkias hachama, they also will be disqualified by sunset. Meaning, Imlo nishka hakiyur bebor lifnei shkias hachama. If the kiyur was not lowered into the pit before shkias hachama, before sunset, nifsalim meimav. So then at that point, its waters will be disqualified. Lekadesh od mehem letzorech avodas yom macher, to use those waters again to sanctify for the next day. Afilu shiku kodem amud hashachar. Even though you did sink the kiyur into the pit before amud hashachar, so there wasn't really technically a lina, because really lina happens at Amud HaShachar, but still, even though that's true, ha'osa lina b'chal makom, even though Amud HaShachar is what creates lina everywhere else, Eino moelo, this is not effective for him. Shalafi avodaso hu chashuva, because according to what the avoda is, that's how we make the calculation, or that's how we figure out in terms of when it's disqualified. V'cheinim shako lifnei shkias hachama. Similarly, let's say they lower it into the pit before shkias hachama, ve'leyu balayla, but then they raise it up at night. Mikevan shemotzo halayla shah achas chutz lebor. From the moment that the night happens, even one moment it's outside of the bor at night, nifsalu meimav, that also would be a disqualification. of its waters, la'avodas hayom, for the avoda of the day. Again, the point over here is that the avoda of the dam, the avoda of the kometz, of the kmitza, that's done during the day. Those are daytime avodos, and in such a situation, we say that the shkias hachama is a disqualification for those avodos, and that's why it's important for, if you're going to do those avodos, you have to sink the mei kior into the pit before shkias hachama. Le'evarim ke'evarim, and then the continuation of Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef is that, let's say the reason why he's sanctifying his hands and his feet is for the avoda of the limbs, which takes place at night. That's the burning of the limbs. Lekadesh mehen la'avodas hekter chalovim. He's sanctifying from the mekior in order to do the avoda of the burning of the fats. Nifsolin ba'amud hashachar. So there, the disqualification is dawn. Kemoshe evarim nifsolin belinas amud hashachar, because that's what we find by evarim as well. They're also disqualified by the linas amud hashachar, by the dawn. Ad boker, like it says, until the morning. Avol kol halayla, but all night, ksherin lekadesh mehen lavodas layla. It would be kosher for him to sanctify from the mekior for doing that work at night. Vimshiko kodem amud hashachar mat. Let's say he sinks it into the pit a little bit before amud hashachar. Ksherin meimav lekidush avodas hayom. So then the water will be kosher. It will be sanctified. It will be able to be used for the sanctification of the avodas hayom. And the Shenuya Nuschos changes the last line of Rashi to the following: Avol im hayu mishukoim kol halayla. If the waters were sunk into the bore the entire night, vehelon ba'amud hashachar, and then they were raised by amud hashachar by dawn, nifsolim bekach af le'evarim. Then they're disqualified even for the evarim. The last line of Rashi is referring also to the evarim. And Rashi continues with Rav Chista's opinion, afla matir, and even for matir and ke'evarim, we follow evarim, meaning keshem she'en hu evarim nifsolin. Just like by the limbs, the disqualification is only ela b'amud hashachar, it's by dawn. Af kol linos ein poslos b'shum kedusha ela b'amud hashachar. So to all concepts of lina, the entire disqualification of lina, according to Rav Chista, is always amud hashachar. It's always at dawn. And finally, Rashi explains the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan amar kior kevan shashaku bebor. Rabbi Yochanan says when it comes to the kior, once it is sunk into the pit, kederech mitzvaso, according to the proper mitzvah, samach l'shkias hachama, right before shkias hachama, right before sunset, shuv ein ma'aleu kol halayli. You can't bring it up the entire night. Because al gadaitach, and initially the Gemara thinks the afilu la'avodas halayla. The Rabbi Yochanan is saying you cannot even bring it up for the avodas halayla, for the avoda that's done at night. Kamer Rabbi Yochanan de mifsal ba halasor. Rabbi Yochanan is saying that it's disqualified if you raise up the kior to try to use it for the avodas halayla. The atarvayu polygon. According to that understanding, Rabbi Yochanan would be arguing on both Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef and Rav Chista. And so, to summarize the opinions of the three Amoraim, again, Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef, he makes a distinction between the Matirin and the Evarim. When it comes to the Matirin, which is the Avodas Hayom, the Avoda that's done during the day, so then the kior needs to be sunk into the bore the entire night. If it's lifted out during the night at all, then you're not allowed to use those waters for the Avodas Hayom. And when it comes to the Avodas Halayla, so then it's just Nifsal, then we say it's just disqualified by Amud HaShachar. Rav Chista said that it's always disqualified. The Meikir are always disqualified by Amud HaShachar. We always go by dawn. And finally, the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan is that the kior has to be sunk the entire night in the bore. If you lift it up at all, so then it's not going to be good for the avodas yom or the avodas laila. And the Gemara now continues and asks on Rabbi Yochanan, Lameimer, does Rabbi Yochanan mean to say the la avodas laila nami lo chazi, that you can't even use it for avodas laila? That's not true. V'yamar Rabbi Yasi, Yamar Rabbi Yochanan mishmei de ilfa, but Rabbi Yasi said that Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of ilfa, kior shalo shako mi ba'erev, if you have a kior that was not lowered into the pit from the evening, mekadesh mimenu la avodas laila, you are allowed to sanctify from it for the avodas laila. Ulamachar eino mekadesh, it's just the next day that you can't be mekadesh. And so the Gemara says, "My eino ma'alehu nami dekamar." Actually, what does Rabbi Yochanan mean when he says that once it's sunk into the bore, you can't lift it up? That's just la avodas yom. That's just for the avodas yom. Essentially, exactly the same as Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef. Avol avodas laila chazi, but it is in fact fit for avodas laila. And so the Gemara asks, "Hihachi, if so, hainu Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef, isn't that exactly the same as Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef?" And Rashi explains, "My eino ma'alehu nami dekamar Rabbi Yochanan la'el." What did Rabbi Yochanan mean when he said you can't lift it up out of the pit? La avodas yom, that's just for avodas yom. Mishum psul avodas yom ka'amar lo. He was saying that you don't want to disqualify it for the avoda of the day. Shelo yifsalu meimav la avodas yom, that the waters should not be disqualified for the avoda of the day. V'kasal kadai techashdan, right now we think, sha'aloas halayla tifsalem la avodas mochak Rabbi Chia, we think that again, bringing it up at night, that's going to disqualify it for the avoda the next day, just like Rabbi Chia. And Rashi continues, if so, Hainu Rabbi Chia, isn't Rabbi Yochanan saying the same as Rabbi Chia? My Eino Ma'aleu to come Rabbi Yochanan Allah to Rabbi Chia to Rabbi Chisda. What's Rabbi Yochanan saying? Eino Ma'aleu responding to Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Chisda. My Yosel Lamemar, what is he coming to say? Ha Rabbi Chia Nami Hachi Kamar. That's exactly what Rabbi Chia was saying. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Beis.